So, Jane, thank you so much for participating in the thoughtful interview. I'm really excited to have you here because I know that the industry that you work in with charter schools and running your own business, it's I'm familiar with that industry, but obviously I'm not the expert. And I worked a little bit in that career. So I'm excited to just learn from you as a parent, as a business owner, and all that. Um, what it is to me to have like a free choice with charter school. So first, would you mind introducing yourself for our audience?
Sure. Thank you for having me. My name is Janie Rodriquez, and I am the founder and CEO of Stop the Wait Rhode Island. And we are a 501c4 nonprofit organization. And really, our mission is to amplify parent voices and build community power. And what that essentially means is every kid deserves to go to a school that best suits their needs, right? I always say that there's not one school that's going to catch every kid. So parents and children benefit from having school choice.
So, as like a parent, and to get straight into it, a lot of folks have a problem with charter schools and public schools. First of all, let's start off with what is the difference between the two?
Well, I will start off by saying
Mm-hmm.
that charter schools are public schools.
Mm-hmm.
Just because people say they aren't doesn't mean they aren't. But charter schools are public schools. They have to, in order for you to start a charter school, you go through a pretty rigorous process. You have to be approved through the Department of Education. And again, that's like a long process, right? It takes like a year to even get to the point where you're starting the school and hiring and such. But once you go through that pretty rigorous process, you still have to abide by Rhode law. You go through review processes every 5 years. If your charter isn't up to par, right, if you're not meeting standards in a particular way, they have the ability to revoke that charter. So again, charter schools are public schools. They serve all different types of students. You just have a bit more autonomy in how you do that, a bit more flexibility in the way that you structure the school.
So, I think it's important to at least address those definitions because a lot of folks are kind of confused about what charter schools are and if there's a difference between public schools. But I'm glad that you cleared that up. And I do have some more clarifying questions in terms of like funding a little bit more down the line. But how did you even get into that space? What inspired you to work within charter schools to then set your own business and become a strong advocate for it? Tell us about that.
Basically, I was just a mom, right? Like a mom who
Mm-hmm.
was like really eager to, help my daughter throughout her education, make sure that she was getting what she needed so she could be successful in the future. And I quickly saw that as like a young mom whose kid was going to the tradition, my traditional neighborhood school, that I felt like she was drowning, right, in her school. And it didn't matter what I did on my end. She wasn't progressing. I couldn't get the school to move the needle. We went through, this happened for many years, right? We went through, and it's like her journey, but it's also my journey as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, we went through many years of testing and, how to best support her. I spent a lot of time at home trying to teach her. And there were just areas where she wasn't making growth, but it didn't matter what I did as a parent. I didn't have a language barrier. Um, you know, I I'm like reading, I'm reading to try to hold the school accountable. I'm reaching out to RIDE and they're like sending me statutes and here I
Mm-hmm.
am trying to hold the school accountable to make sure that she's learning and growing. But on their end, I also kept getting like these notices saying like, your daughter needs improvement in every area. But then I would ask for a meeting and they would be like, oh no, she's fine. And I'm like, but those two things can't exist at the same time. Where like your kid needs improvement in every area, but she's fine. So then I'm trying to learn as much about all of this as possible because I'm not an educator. And so I started reading again, like the state statutes, and I'm like, maybe she needs a 504, maybe she needs an IEP, maybe there's a learning disability. So I'm going through this journey, and at this point, we're like on year 11 of this journey, right? So that's kind of how I started out as just like a regular mom who's trying to help my kid. And then over the years, we just kept applying to charter schools as a low income mom. I couldn't just get up and move to a different school. This is the school that we had access to. And I tried switching her to a different school within the district. That also didn't work. Just even trying to have a conversation with the superintendent, reaching out, like I couldn't get anyone. So here I am like a parent, I'm reaching out to my school committee. Like, I felt like I'm yelling and no one will help. So eventually, eventually I start working in schools through like operations roles, front desk operations. And eventually I go to work at Achievement First, and she gets preference because I'm a staff there. And she finally gets into a charter school, and within 3 months, she closed her writing gap. So she went from like not being able to write a perfect sentence to writing a perfect essay, to being one of their best writers, despite the fact that she entered that school system in the 5th grade. And then with math, we didn't make those same gains. So very quickly, they were like, they could tell that something was also wrong in math, despite the intervention she was receiving, after school help. And then we ended up going down the route of, perhaps she does have a learning disability. She did finally get an IEP in the towards the end of 5th grade. And later on in 9th grade, she ended up being diagnosed with an arithmetic disability, specifically dyscalculia, which is like dyslexia for math. But that's kind of the journey that I went through as a parent, to then eventually trying to address systemic issues, or where I'm at now, to really trying to provide the support that parents need to navigate the school system, all those things that I had to like learn on my own, to then figuring out how do we collectively as a group push for better options for our kids. Because if we were rich, we could just move and use our wealth to then pick a school that would best suit our kids. But because we are not, we're then relegated to that local school that may or may not be the best fit for our kid.
So there's definitely a need, and I think that's almost, a lot of the story of a lot of parents, right? Who become advocates within this role. They see a need, they see that our school system has been failing our kids, unfortunately. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So it did take a lot. It just sounded like a lot. And I'm glad that your daughter's having way more successes within charter schools. And I know that all of that was catalyst for Stop the Wait, right?
Absolutely.
All of this was just building up to your organization, and now your organization is doing amazing work. So tell us a little bit about the work that your organization does, and was that the catalyst? Did you start it immediately right after, like, hey, we got to do something different, let's get to work?
So actually, I was working, and again, in an operation where I was running the operations of a tri-state career exploration program.
Sounds like a mouthful. Yeah.
At Achievement First, right? So my job has nothing to do with this. But at this point, my daughter's been in that school for like 3 years. She's made a lot of gains, right? I could see the positive work that the school is doing, right? The way that they bridge gaps with the community, the way that they support parents. When we would have like, even like a cultural night, right? Like every parent would show up with like a platter of food. And then everyone would have to take like a platter of food because there's so much food. And I'm talking like 300 parents, right? It's beautiful, right? For like a cultural night, right? It's not like report card night. This is just like a random cultural night, right? But I saw the way, the work that they were doing, and it was really beautiful. So I was able to see this work not only from the inside, but then I was also able to experience it myself as a parent. So in 2021, there was a proposed moratorium to put a pause on charter school seat growth for the next 3 years. And at that point, I just felt like I couldn't let that go, right? There's a bill where they're actively considering retroactively taking back seats, while lotteries are going to run on April 1 and people are going to be given spots, right? Like my kid sat on a list for 6 years where we couldn't access these schools. So that's really that was the catalyst. That's what led to the creation of Stop the Wait Rhode Island. I took a small group of 25 parents to the Senate, and this was remote during COVID. It took like 2 hours for them to even call one of us, right? They heard from a slew of people before they heard from any parents, and they ignored us and they passed the bill. And I knew that we would need more political power in order to defeat this bill. And then a couple days later, we started Stop the Wait Rhode Island, and really were able to, get a little bit of seed funding and really try to push this message and try to reach as many parents as possible. Because as you know, parents are working, right? Like this is not, their kids are super important, right? But you're worried about paying bills, making ends meet. You're not paying attention to what's happening at the State House. This bill, they would have found out a year later, right? Or 2 years later when it was actually implemented. But while it was happening, a lot of people didn't know these discussions were happening. So really it was our role to make sure that to make sure that regular parents and people knew that this was the conversation that they were having at the State House. And it was our job to then put a stop to it, right? Last year, for the 22-23 school year, there were 27,864 charter school applications in Rhode Island. So the demand is clear. Parents want more options, right? So it's important for our lawmakers then to help support those options. And that's why Stop the Wait Rhode Island exists.
While organizing families to pass policies, and that within itself is amazing, right? Because and I'm just making a blanket statement, but in a general statement, where we come from, not a lot of folks are politically involved, right? So being able to organize families to pass policies, like how do you organize the families to really galvanize, to get up and say enough is enough, we want policy change, and we're going to get politically active? And how can they get involved to continue this work, or to support the work that you're doing?
So what we do through Stop the Wait, right, at the time when that bill happened, we were just responding to like an occurrence, right? We're responding to this bill. We had no way to plan for it. But what we do is we've now built out the organization. We just opened our office in May. It's a really beautiful office. We have kid spaces. We have classroom space for parents. We have laptops. So we run parent academies where we really teach the parents, like, what are their rights, right? The whole point of this too is that parents can then hold their kids' schools accountable. What are their rights concerning MLL students? What are their rights concerning special ed rights? What are their rights concerning bullying, right? So we really go through this journey where we equip parents with the tools that they need to be better advocates at the school level. And then we build their capacity in that way, and we collectively decide what are the areas that we want to push? What are some things that we want to change? What do we want to bring light to? So we're still, as a startup, I'm sure as you know, like we're still in the early phases, right? Every policy has to be built out, internal policy as an organization. But we are on this journey where we're like plugging together and building together. And that's kind of where we want to be. But we also have like a food pantry where we distribute food every week to families that are in need, typically on Tuesdays. Parents can go to our website, stopthewaitri.org. They can sign up for our newsletter. We usually send out a monthly newsletter. We also send out our schedule for programming and for our food pantry, which again is typically on Tuesdays. We have a literacy course that's starting on the last Saturday of the month in January, where we're going to be teaching parents the foundations of how to teach their kids how to read with an expert from the field. But it's really about building parent capacity so that then we could determine what the school system should look like for our children.
Yeah, no, and it's not that, again, that's amazing work, right? I think it all starts with knowledge, right? Knowledge is power. We keep hearing that. Information is the precursor to wisdom. So, preparing families, I know that's a huge lift. And again, this is why it's amazing work, right? Because our parents are really getting involved to do the work and to advance the educational space, to just advance us generally. And when you're teaching these parents and they want to get involved, they want to get their kids in a charter school. One thing that I keep hearing about is the pushback on charter school, right? Saying because it's like a lottery, it's not really free choice. So, as this person, as this parent, let's just pretend I'm a parent, and I want to give my kid a better education. And obviously there's charter schools, and there's the nearby public school. What would you say to that person who wants to take their kid out of public school? And when I keep making that differences, I know that charter schools are public school. I'm just trying to make it
Yeah.
a little
There's
more.
traditional and
Yeah,
non-traditional public schools.
What would you tell that parent, right? If they're saying, well, there's no choice, it's a lottery. What would you tell that parent? How would you motivate them to get involved? And what should they do?
Well, typically, we also run workshops where we support parents in enrolling their kids in the charter school application, right? I would say that's definitely step one. It's a lottery, right? Either your kid's going to get in or they're not. They might be waitlist. They'll definitely be waitlisted if they don't get in, but it's like depending on where they are on that wait list. There may have the ability to get in or not, even a little later throughout that school year. But essentially, the first step is applying. And then from there, making a decision as to, what makes sense for your kid. There is like the rare occasion where, depending on just thinking of like the lottery itself, there are different access points, right? Like for kindergarten, you have a school that potentially is taking 90 new kids, right? Then those 90 kids go on to first grade, but maybe one of them moves or two of them. So then you might have 300 applications for, 2 spots. That's where it gets a little trickier. But then we have some schools that start in 5th grade or 6th grade. So then they're taking 90 kids, right? Or 60 kids, depending on how many kids or classrooms they serve. And then again, that access point happens at the high school level, right? But every kid is different. There's not one school model, not even a charter school. I don't care what school you run. There is not one school that's so great that they're going to capture every kid. So it's really about what makes the most sense for your kid and navigating that. I would say the Enroll Rhode Island site through RIDE is a great starting point. Again, when you're applying for charter schools, not only now, it's like the common app for charter schools. You can go in, create your account, put your address in, and once you do that, it gives you a list of all the schools that you have access to. But there's also a little eye there where you can see like, what's the niche of that school, right? Some schools, right, it might be a construction school, it might be a performing arts school, right? So you can look to see, you can also compare, there's a compare tool on that site where you can compare different schools and see like, what does this school offer versus this one? Or if you're in Providence, you can also compare it to a Providence school and say like, what am I getting? It might be that the thing that you want is at your local school and perhaps not at that charter school. But again, it's figuring out what school is going to meet your kids' needs best.
Okay, wow. And I like what you just said about the niche part. And just quickly, how would a parent kind of research that, right? I'm thinking about like my mother, for instance. How would she would have researched to understand like, okay, this is what this school provides, and this is where this person should go. Our sons. How would they do that? Which is
It's really through that site.
right.
There's a compare tool. You literally can click on 2 schools and hit compare through the Enroll Rhode Island site. And it gives you a list, like a drop down. It tells you like, do they offer sports,
Really.
theater, band, like all that. It gives you like this long list and it shows you like what the different schools provide. Do they both provide it? Does one of them or the other one not? Also, a lot of charter schools also have like open houses. They also have the charter fair where you can go and specifically speak. There's a charter fair coming up January 24th that's hosted through the Rhode Island Charter League, and that's at Times Square Academy. I believe it starts at 5:30 p.m. That's another great place for parents to go and tap in and then speak to different schools in one place. And there will also be support there from RIDE to apply to charter schools as well. So again, that's another great resource for the community.
That's great. And do you know if they have different languages, like maybe in Spanish?
Absolutely. We'll be there also
Okay,
to support in
perfect.
Spanish.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Again, a lot of good work going around. A lot of good resources for families to just take advantage and really use their choices. And wondering, from your opinion, from your expert opinion, do you see a change coming with charter schools? Do you think it's always going to be? I didn't read anything. This is just a question. Do you think it'll change from lottery to maybe some sort of other system where like folks can possibly maybe directly apply to the schools? Do you think there will ever be like that sort of change? What do you think?
I think that based on, I don't think that there will be just because they are essentially the secondary system that was introduced, right? Like the public school is the school in the neighborhood by default, but the way that charter schools are approved, they're approved for particular seats, right? Particular grades. So it's not like you can decide, oh, we're gonna have 4 kindergarten classes. Also, if we're being honest in terms of space, charter schools don't have an unlimited access to space, right? I would say that charter schools are cost burdened. The money does follow the kid in Rhode Island. So per pupil, charter schools actually receive less money per kid. but also a lot of that money goes towards facilities. And that's a really big challenge right now. There are some schools that haven't been able to open because they haven't been able to secure facilities. So it's not like, like if you're a traditional public school, you have access to the buildings, school buildings that the city owns. So the city could say that school's at capacity, but you can enroll your kid over here, or we could make space over there. But that's not true for charter schools, especially a small charter school, right? Like a charter school that has one school attached to it. It's like that. We have space for 350 kids. I'm just using a random number. And there would be nowhere else to put an additional classroom. So I would say just because of the way that the two systems exist and the way that they're structured right now, I don't see that changing.
Okay, that sounds fair. And you said something really interesting and something that I mentioned earlier in the beginning, and I want to get back to it. Right, is the money follows the pupil. We hear a lot right now, or a lot of discussions about how, again, charter schools and public schools are the same thing, but how a student going to a charter school is taking money from a public school, and of course, a charter school is a public school. So, how would you educate a person on that, right? How would you iron that out? Because there's a lot of people that really do believe that charter schools are just taking the money, creating a vacuum with the money, right? The money's just completely gone for public schools, and it's going to this industry or this institution, and it's not really supporting that industry. How would you tell that person that?
I would
Essentially the same
say
thing.
I would say that charter schools are public schools, and it's not, the onus shouldn't be put on families, right? Most of the people that enter lotteries, think about it, you're essentially gambling with your kid's education because you feel that your local school isn't meeting your kid's needs, or perhaps you went to that local school and you want something different for your own kid, right? But it shouldn't be that because you're too poor to move, that you shouldn't have access to better schooling options for your kids or to a different type of education that you feel that would best fit your needs. Charter schools provide agency to low-income families, and they should have that agency to pick those schools for their kids. And in terms of the money does follow the kid. We all pay taxes. They are all public schools. Again, we have the right to pick what school, we should have the right to pick what school is going to best meet our kids' needs in order for them to thrive and have a better future. At the end of the day, right now, the reality is that, again, it doesn't matter if it's a charter school or a public school, they can't meet every kid's needs. So kids and families benefit from having school choice.
I mean, I personally never quite understood the debate, to be honest. I think it's even from like a principal, when you think about it from a principal perspective, right? I think every parent should have that choice, like you said. They should be able to send their kid wherever they want, if it's going to meet that need. And Janie, you said a lot. I mean, Stop the Wait RI has a lot of wonderful programs. You've been in this space, I mean, just championing policies and really moving and shaking. So what's next for your organization? What do you got going on, the next year, maybe in the next couple of years? And can we get involved? Can people support that? Let us know.
So Stop the Wait Rhode Island is a 501c4. We are in the process of opening our 501c3, Stop the Wait Rhode Island Fund. And again, we're just looking forward to expanding programming for parents to better equip them with the tools that they need to be better advocates at the school level. We're really looking forward to shaping the education system that our kids deserve collectively as a group. So from us, definitely look out for great classes like, again, like the literacy course that we're launching later at the end of January, and also other programming that we'll be pushing through, like our website. Follow us on social media. We have a Twitter or an X, Instagram. We also have Facebook. So definitely follow us on social media. Get linked to our newsletter so you could see what kind of upcoming classes we'll definitely be providing to the community. We typically also provide childcare for families, and we definitely also, we try to remove barriers and feed folks as well, but definitely get connected that way.
All right. Well, I'm going to list all of that when I release the interview. I'm going to make sure to have that on our platforms as well so people know where to find you, find your organization, and get involved. But Again, thank you so much for participating. It's been an honor. I learned a lot. I'm sure that our audience is going to get a lot of information, a lot of good gems out of this conversation. So I'm sure I'll have you again. It's a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.